Hello and welcome to the next episode in my tutorial series, Keyboard and Theory Basics on Synthesizers. So far we've introduced ourselves to the keyboard, we've learnt the names of the notes, we've learned how they correspond to the notes on the musical staff, even though we're not learning to read music. We've discussed a little about rhythm, we've discussed intervals, we've discussed scales, and last episode we spent quite some time talking about the circle of fifths. We also introduced the concept of the 7-note scales and the pentatonic scales. What I'm going to talk about today is, you may have noticed that the pentatonic scale I mentioned, all the notes sound harmonious with one another. That characteristic, that property of sounding harmonious, you could say relates to the strength of the note with respect to the scale. So in other words, some notes feel very at home in a scale, some notes feel less at home in the scale. I call the ones that sound at home very strong, and the ones that don't sound at home or sound less at home to be weak. So let's take our C major scale as an example. So C major, we know. We also know how to turn that C major into a pentatonic scale. How do we do it? We do it by dropping the 4th and the 6th. So that was a C major pentatonic. We dropped the 4th and the 6th, and we demonstrated why that was done with respect to the circle of fifths. And now we ask ourselves, well, of the 4th and the 6th, which of those is more harmonious? Which is harmonically stronger? We can say that all of the pentatonic notes are strong. But is the 7 stronger or is the 4 stronger? The way that we'd like to talk about that is with respect to harmonics. So let me tell you what harmonics are. For a given frequency, integer multiples of that frequency correspond to its harmonics. The harmonic we see often is the second harmonic. The first harmonic is the note you started with. The second harmonic is a note 1 octave above, precisely. The third harmonic is now 3 times that pitch, which is very close to a fifth on an equal tempered keyboard. And then the 4th harmonic will be another octave. The 5th harmonic is roughly the major third an octave above. So that's the harmonic series. But how does that mean anything to us? Well, the reason it means something to us is when we have a stable pitch playing and there's no real movement going on there, then we can think of that tone as being made up of a set of simpler tones, and those simpler tones are sine waves, which you can think of as the simplest possible tone. And you can place more than one of them on top of each other at different amplitudes, called the superposition of sines, and this will represent something you will hear as a certain timbre. So you may have heard, for example, of square waves containing only the odd numbered harmonics, or a saw wave contains all the harmonics. Now, each harmonic is not the same volume, and in fact they go down in volume as you go up the scale. So harmonically then, when you play a note that is close to a low numbered harmonic of another note, then it sounds harmonious. When it is not close to a low numbered harmonic, it sounds inharmonious. Now we won't go through this analysis, but I can tell you that the harmonic relation between our root and that major 7th is stronger than the relationship between the root and the perfect 4th. So we would say then that the 7 is stronger than the 4. Now, we've understood this in the concept of the major scale, but the question is, how do we apply this same logic to the other modal scales that we know about? And I think it's worth taking a little aside to talk about this. Specifically, when I told you about the pentatonic scale, I said you can construct the minor pentatonic scale from the minor scale by omitting the 2nd and the 6th. Now, for the major, we omitted the 4th and the 7th. 2nd and 6th, how is that related? Well, it turns out you can understand that relationship in the context of relative scales. So, a relative scale is a scale with different roots and the same notes. So, for example, C major and A minor are relative scales. So let's have a look and let's construct the A minor pentatonic by omitting the 2nd and the 6th. So that's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6, 7. So notice that the notes that I've ended up playing here are exactly the same notes as the C major pentatonic. So that means that the pentatonic scales are also relative. That also means that we can see from knowing the C major scale which notes we can omit to construct any modal scale. So as an example, let's take the Dorian mode. So we know that D, starting at D using only the white notes, corresponds to the D Dorian mode. So let's look at which notes are omitted from the scale. So we've got the 1, we've got the 2, not the 3, we've got the 4, the 5, not the 6. So we've dropped the 3 and the 6 in the Dorian mode. So to construct a Dorian pentatonic, we make a Dorian scale and we drop the 3rd and the 6th. So let's play a C Dorian scale, has 2 flats. So let's drop the 3rd. And let's drop the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is now the C Dorian pentatonic scale. Sometimes in theory it's given different names, but I find this to be a much more convenient name. Now we ask ourselves, well, of these notes I omitted, this one and this one, which is harmonically stronger? Well, it turns out that the analysis we applied to the C major scale can be applied to any of the modal scales, and we already know the answer. How do we know the answer? Well, let's look at the C major scale again, C major pentatonic. We know that this note is the weakest, and this is less weak. So notice that we omitted the 3rd and the 6th. So in other words, the 6th in the Dorian scale is stronger than the 3rd, but neither of them are in the pentatonic. So that note there ended up being in our C Dorian scale, the weakest note, and this one's a bit stronger, and all the rest of them are equally strong. So we've come up with some way of ranking notes with their strength. We know that the root is the strongest. The rest of that pentatonic scale, I'll switch to a more familiar scale, C minor pentatonic. So the same analysis can be applied to C minor pentatonic, and we will discover that the 6th is the flat 6th is the weakest, and the D, or rather the major 2nd, is the stronger of the two missing notes. So we therefore know this is the strongest. These are less strong, but still strong. This is weaker. This is even weaker. And I think you can hear that listening to it. So what do we do with these notes? Well, what we would tend to do is we don't want to always stick to the pentatonic, because our goal is not always to play the most harmonious thing that we can. Our goal is to navigate harmony and make our way back to the root typically, or to resolution. But as notes get weaker, you can still play them. but with two caveats. Typically, you will play them less frequently when they are weaker in the scale, and also you will play them for less long when they're in the scale. So C minor pentatonic. So in that case, I played that A flat for quite a long time, and it was a bit of a strange thing to play. And the D, I hung around on it for a little bit long. So that was a sort of atypical use case. I'll show you one of the ways that we sometimes play these notes which are weaker. One of the ways, if it's a black note and a white note adjacent to it is in the scale, we play a thing called a crush note, where we hit the corner of that note and we drop onto the white note. So in that case, you can hear it's played extremely short. So it's the tiny little accent of that note there. The D is a little bit stronger. So you see, I didn't sit on it for very long, but I did play that D note there. So hopefully you get a feel for how you might choose to play these notes in a musical context. I'm going to play a little improvisation in that same scale. I'll use both octaves and we'll just see how it goes. So, not a particularly interesting improvisation, but hopefully it illustrated that because I knew that these pentatonic tones were the strongest, I knew that the D was a step down in strength there, I knew that the C was the strongest, I knew that A flat was the weakest of the notes that are in the scale. I spent more or less time on either of those, and I tended to play them in passing. I tended to play them transitionally. So I think that's all I wanted to discuss today. So let's say that this is all we're going to talk about for strong and weak notes. My recommendation is, once you are playing, especially in a harmonic context, you will be able to hear the notes that really sound comfortable and in the scale, and notes that sound strange and out of the scale. So don't focus too much on this analysis, although you will internalize it eventually, but focus on how things sound. In any case, I hope this was interesting to you. I hope the series has been interesting and informative so far. I hope you join me for some more videos in the series, but in any case, I'd like to say thank you for watching and goodbye.